November 23rd, 1942, Kalak-na-Donu. Soviet tanks roll across the Don River Bridge as German radio operators transmit their final messages before the encirclement closes. General Friedrich Paulus sits in his bunker at Gumrak, staring at maps that show red arrows converging from north and south. 3 questions frame the next 76 days. Can 250,000 German soldiers survive winter in a pocket 60 kilometers wide? Will Hermann Göring's Luftwaffe deliver the 750 tons of supplies needed daily? How many will walk out alive when the guns stop firing? Operation Uranus began 4 days earlier when Marshal Georgy Zhukov launched 1.1 million Soviet troops against Army Group Don's flanks. Romanian and Italian divisions collapsed within hours. Now German 6th Army and 4th Panzer Army face complete isolation in the Stalingrad pocket. The Wehrmacht has never attempted to supply an entire army by air through a Russian winter. November 24th, 6:30 hours. Colonel Wilhelm Adam enters Paulus's command bunker at Gumrak Airfield with the morning situation report. Soviet forces have linked up at Kalak, cutting the last supply route. Adam counts the figures: 250,000 German and Axis troops trapped, 100,000 horses that will freeze or starve, 800 artillery pieces that need shells. Daily supply requirement stands at 750 tons minimum. The Luftwaffe promises 300 tons per day if weather permits. The gap between promise and reality will measure in graves. Major Hans-Joachim Marseille, of Transport Squadron 172, briefs his pilots at Tatsinskaya on fuel calculations. Flight distance to Potomnik, 180 kilometers each way. Ju-52 maximum range with full payload, 1,165 kilometers. Weather factors reduce this by 200 kilometers. Soviet fighter activity costs another 100 kilometers in evasive maneuvering. The mathematics leave no margin for error. General Arthur Schmidt, 6th Army Chief of Staff, spreads aerial photographs across the planning table. Soviet anti-aircraft guns ring every German airfield within range. Potomnik Airfield, 20 kilometers west of Stalingrad city center, shows fresh bomb craters from overnight raids. Gumrak Airfield, the pocket's western edge, remains operational, but crowded with damaged aircraft. Tatsinskaya Airfield, 180 kilometers outside the pocket, serves as the main Luftwaffe supply base until Soviet tanks arrive. Schmidt marks supply priorities on his planning board. Ammunition, 60%, food, 20%, medical supplies 15%, fuel 5%. Reality forces harder choices. Each Ju-52 carries either 400 artillery shells or bread for 2,000 men for 1 day. Never both. Oberst Wolfgang Pickert requests anti-aircraft ammunition for his remaining 89 flak guns. Schmidt crosses out the request. Infantry needs rifle cartridges. More than gunners need shells. Lieutenant Colonel Hans Ulrich Rudel lands his Stuka dive bomber at Potomnik, carrying medical supplies and mail from home. His aircraft shows damage from Soviet fighters. 37 bullet holes in wings and fuselage, damaged. Hydraulics, cracked canopy. Ground temperature reads minus 15 Celsius. Rudel's crew chief counts frost damage to aircraft engines parked overnight without heated hangars. 12 planes require engine replacement. Parts availability, 0. November 25th, 1400 hours. The first major airlift attempt reaches Potomnik. Junkers Ju-52 transports lumber across frozen fields loaded with ammunition and medical supplies instead of food. Colonel Fritz Morzik commands Luftflotte 4's transport wing with 298 aircraft. On paper, reality delivers fewer than 200 serviceable machines daily. Each Ju-52 carries 2.5 tons maximum payload across 300 kilometers of Soviet fighters and anti-aircraft fire. The mathematics of survival run red from the start. Captain Ernst Wilhelm Dittmer pilots. Transport Group 9 through heavy flak over the Don Bend. His formation loses 3 aircraft to Soviet Yak-1 fighters before reaching Potomnik. Payload manifest: 80 tons of 7.92 mm ammunition, 15 tons of medical morphine, 12 tons of radio batteries. No food. Dittmer's crew loads 22 wounded soldiers for the return flight. Weight calculations force him to leave behind 2 stretcher cases who die before the next transport arrives. Hauptmann Karl-Heinz Becker commands the 389th Infantry Division's supply depot at Potomnik. His warehouse contains ammunition for 3 days of light combat, medical supplies for 500 wounded, and food for 8,000 men for 4 days. Daily consumption: ammunition for 1 day of combat, medical supplies for 800 wounded, food for 15,000 men. Becker's arithmetic shows impossible numbers. His evening report requests emergency resupply priority. The response never comes. Major Thiel's transport squadron lands at Potomnik, carrying 40 tons of ammunition and 15 tons of hardtack biscuits. Ground crews count bullet holes in every fuselage. Wounded soldiers crowd the loading ramps for evacuation flights. Weight limits force impossible. Choices: ammunition or food, medical supplies or fuel, wounded men or frozen corpses. Captain Hans Bauer, Hitler's personal pilot, flies evacuation missions and reports that each aircraft departing Potomnik carries 20 wounded, but leaves 200 more behind. Dr. Wilhelm Riesener establishes the main casualty clearing station in Potomnik's former control tower. His medical team includes 4 surgeons, 12 medics, and no anesthesia. Daily casualties: 180 wounded from combat, 340 frostbite cases, 87 deaths from disease and exposure. Riesener operates by candlelight using kitchen knives sterilized over aircraft engine fires. Amputation rate: 60% of frostbite cases. Survival rate after amputation: 15%. November 28th, 03:15 hours. Soviet night bombers attack Potomnik during aircraft loading operations. Petlyakov P-2 bombers drop fragmentation bombs across the runway and aircraft parking areas. Flight Sergeant Anton Weber's Ju-52 explodes during fuel loading, killing his crew and 18 wounded soldiers waiting for evacuation. The attack destroys 7 transport aircraft and damages 12 more. Weber's replacement arrives from Tatsinskaya within 6 hours. December 3rd, Gumruk Airfield. Obergefreiter Klaus Becker of the 24th Panzer Division writes his final letter home on paper, torn from ammunition boxes. Outside temperature reads -18 Celsius. Horse meat rations drop to 200 grams daily per man. Becker's company started November with 140 soldiers and now musters 67 effective. Frostbite cases exceed combat casualties by 3 to 1. The division's remaining 15 panzers lack fuel for movement and serve as fixed gun positions. General Major Arno von Lenski commands the 24th Panzer Division from a bunker constructed inside a destroyed Soviet T-34 tank. His daily strength report lists 3,200 men present from an authorized strength of 13,000. Combat effective: 4,800 men with rifles and adequate clothing. Tank strength: 15 Panzer IV tanks, 8 Panzer III tanks, 4 assault guns. Fuel reserves: 200 liters total. Ammunition: 180 rounds of high explosive, 90 rounds of armor-piercing. Expected duration of combat operations: 6 hours maximum. Hauptmann Friedrich Siebel of the 376th Infantry Division reports similar conditions from his positions near the Volga. River: his battalion occupies defensive positions in concrete factory ruins with walls 2 meters thick. Effective strength: 89 men from 750. Daily ration: 1 slice of bread, watery soup made from horse bones, occasional potato. Ammunition allowance: 10 rifle rounds per man per day for combat operations. The men save bullets by using knives and bayonets when Soviet patrols approach within 20 meters. General Hermann Hoth's 4th Panzer Army launches Operation Winter Storm on December 12th, attempting to break the encirclement from the southwest. Panzer Group Manstein advances from Kotelnikovo with 230 tanks toward the Mishkova River, 48 kilometers from the pocket's edge. Colonel Hyacinth Graf Strachwitz leads the spearhead with exhausted crews and machines running on emergency reserves. Soviet resistance hardens at every village. December 13th, 14:30 hours, Verkhnechumsky. Strachwitz's 6th Panzer Division engages Soviet 51st Army positions with 47 operational tanks. The advance covers 12 kilometers in 8 hours against increasing resistance. Captain Hans von Luck commands the reconnaissance battalion and reports Soviet T-34 tanks in hold-down positions behind anti-tank ditches. German losses: 8 tanks destroyed, 14 damaged, 67 casualties. Soviet defensive positions show careful preparation with multiple fallback lines. Major General Vasily Volsky commands Soviet 4th Mechanized Corps defending the Mishkova River line with 160 tanks and 18,000 men. His defensive plan channels German attacks into prepared killing zones covered by anti-tank guns and artillery. Volsky's morning briefing identifies German intentions. Enemy seeks to reach Stalingrad pocket within 72 hours. We will stop them. At the river, his corps deploys across 15 kilometers of front with orders to hold until reinforcements arrive from the Strategic Reserve. December 14th, 800 hours. German artillery preparation begins with 120 guns firing for 45 minutes against Soviet positions along the Mishkova River. Oberst Eberhard Roth's Panzer Regiment advances with 39 tanks in wedge formation toward Bridge 117. Soviet anti-tank guns open fire at 800 meters range. German tanks reach the riverbank but cannot establish bridgehead positions. Soviet 76-meter guns destroy 11 German tanks within 20 minutes. The attack stalls 200 meters from the bridge. December 15th, 900 hours. Verkhnechumsky. Strachwitz's panzers reach the Mishkova River after 3 days of continuous combat. Radio contact with 6th Army confirms their position, 48 kilometers separate relief force from trapped divisions. Paulus requests permission to break out southward and link up with Hoth's advance. The message travels through Army Group Dawn to Wehrmacht High Command in East Prussia. Hitler's response arrives at 14:30 hours. 6th Army will hold present positions. General Schmidt calculates breakout requirements in his Gumrak bunker. Fuel needed for 48-kilometer movement, 800 tons minimum. Current fuel reserves, 120 tons. Required ammunition for fighting withdrawal, 400 tons. Available ammunition, 60 tons. Time window for successful breakout, 72 hours maximum before Soviet reinforcements arrive. Schmidt's assessment reaches Hitler through Field Marshal Erich von Manstein. The response remains unchanged. Colonel Adam monitors radio traffic between Hoth's forces and 6th Army headquarters throughout December 15th. Key transmissions logged, Idoro 9:30 hours. Relief force at Mishkova River, request immediate. Breakout, 1200 hours. Breakout depends on fuel delivery by air, 1430 hours. Higher command forbids movement from current positions, 1600 hours. Relief attempt continues tomorrow with reduced forces. The radio logs document the moment salvation became impossible. December 16th, 5:30 hours. Soviet 2nd Guards Army launches counterattack against Hoth's spearhead with 240 tanks and 25,000 infantry. General Rodion Malinovsky commands the assault from positions north of the Mishkova River. German 6th Panzer Division faces attacks from 3 directions simultaneously. Strachwitz requests immediate air support and artillery reinforcement. Luftwaffe response, 12. Stuka dive bombers available, weather permitting. Artillery support, impossible due to ammunition shortage. General Major Wolfgang Pickert commands the 9th Flak Division inside the pocket and controls the remaining anti-aircraft guns protecting German airfields. His daily reports track the steady collapse. December 16th shows 89 operational guns. December 20th lists 61 guns with adequate ammunition. December 24 counts 34 guns still firing. Soviet Il-2 Sturmovik ground attack aircraft appear overhead in formations of 20 or more, targeting aircraft on the ground and supply columns moving between positions. December 18th, 1200 hours, Potomnik perimeter. Hauptmann Ernst Geidermann commands Flak Battery 47 with 4 80mm guns defending the airfield's eastern approach. Soviet ground attack aircraft approach at 50 meters altitude in line formation. Geidermann's guns fire 180 rounds in 12 minutes and claim 4 aircraft destroyed. Soviet return fire damages 2 gun positions and kills 8 crew members. Ammunition expenditure exceeds daily resupply by 300%. Battery effectiveness drops to 50%. Colonel Hermann Plucher, Luftflotte 4. Operations officer, flies reconnaissance, missions over the pocket daily and reports Soviet anti-aircraft strength increasing. December 19th, count 280 Soviet anti-aircraft guns surrounding German positions, and 150 fighters operating from airfields within 100 kilometers. German air defense, 34 operational flak guns, 12 fighter aircraft. The ratio favors Soviet forces by 10 to 1, Plucher's assessment. Air superiority lost permanently. December 19th, Tatsinskaya, Airfield. Lieutenant Colonel Joachim Müncheberg leads the remaining Messerschmitt Bf-109 fighters of Jagdgeschwader 77 in their final escort mission. Soviet tanks of the 24th Tank Corps roll across the airfield perimeter at 0430 hours, overrunning fuel dumps and aircraft parking areas. Müncheberg's fighters escape to Rostov with bullet holes in their wings and fuel gauges reading empty. The last major Luftwaffe base within transport range falls to enemy fire. Major General Vasily Badanov commands the 24th Tank Corps assault on Tatsinskaya with 130 T-34 tanks and 5,100 mechanized infantry. His advance covers 240 kilometers in 48 hours through German rear areas. The attack catches Luftwaffe ground personnel completely unprepared. Soviet tanks destroy 72 transport aircraft on the ground and capture 350 tons of aviation fuel. German resistance collapses within 3 hours. Badanov's corps continues toward Morozovsk airfield 40 kilometers southeast. Oberst Joachim Deichmann commands Transport Wing 172 at Tatsinskaya and organizes the evacuation under fire. His aircraft mechanics work through Soviet artillery bombardment to prepare flyable machines for departure. Final aircraft count at Tatsinskaya, 180 Ju-52 transports destroyed or damaged, 47 aircraft evacuated to other bases. Personnel losses, 290 aircrew and ground staff killed or captured. Fuel and supply losses, 800 tons of aviation gasoline, 1,200. Tons of ammunition and spare parts. If you value documented and post-war history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Now, back to the story. December the 22nd, Potomnik Airfield. The morning airlift brings 47 tons of supplies aboard 23 Ju-52 transports instead of the promised 150 tons from 80 aircraft. Major Gerhard Schreiber commands the field's defensive perimeter with 400 men from mixed units. Soviet artillery ranges the runway with increasing accuracy. Shell fragments pierce aircraft fuel tanks and puncture transport loads. Schreiber's morning report lists 12 aircraft destroyed on the ground and 31 damaged beyond repair. Supply tonnage delivered drops below 100 tons daily for the first time. Lieutenant Hans-Georg. Becher pilots, one of the last successful supply runs to Potomnik on December 22nd. His Ju-52 carries 2.8 tons of ammunition and medical supplies through weather conditions requiring instrument flight. Ground visibility, 200 meters in blowing snow. Temperature, minus 25 Celsius. Soviet fighters intercept his formation 15 kilometers from the airfield. Becher's aircraft suffers engine damage but completes the landing. The return flight carries 19 wounded soldiers to safety. Oberst Kurt Zeitzler, Wehrmacht Chief of General Staff, reviews airlift statistics in his East Prussia headquarters on December 23rd. Daily tonnage delivered to 6th Army averages 97 tons, against requirements of 750 tons minimum. Aircraft losses reach 15% per operational day. Zeitzler calculates that 6th Army will exhaust ammunition reserves by January 8th and food reserves by January 15th. His briefing to Hitler includes these projections. The response: the Army will fight with available resources. Captain Friedrich Siebel of the 376th Infantry Division establishes his command post in a burned-out tractor factory 800 meters from the Volga River. His regiment numbers 320 men from an October strength of 2,400. Daily rations consist of watery soup made from bones and occasional bread baked with sawdust. Ammunition allowance permits 5 rifle rounds per man per day. Soviet snipers operate from buildings 50 meters away. Combat effectiveness approaches 0. December 24th, Factory District. Lieutenant Wolfgang Welz commands the 3rd Company Defensive. Positions in Building 47 of the Red October Steelworks. His men occupy 3 floors connected by improvised tunnels through rubble. Company strength, 23 men from 180. Soviet 62nd Army maintains constant pressure with grenade attacks and sniper fire. Welz's ammunition inventory, 180 rifle rounds, 12 hand grenades, 4 Panzerfaust anti-tank weapons. Daily consumption in light combat, 200 rifle rounds, 20 grenades. The arithmetic shows impossible ratios. Hauptmann Ernst Koenig commands the 295th Infantry Division's positions near the grain elevator south of the factory district. His battalion defends a front 400 meters wide with 89 effective soldiers. Soviets. Forces attack nightly with 200-man assault groups supported by flamethrowers and demolition charges. Koenig's defensive plan relies on concrete barriers and mined approaches. December casualties. 47 men killed or wounded, 12 men missing. Replacements, 0. Medical evacuation, impossible due to enemy fire. December 26th, 600 hours. Soviet mechanized forces launched their assault on Potomnik Airfield from 3 directions. Colonel Ivan Burmakov's 16th Tank Brigade leads the attack with 41 T-34 tanks, supported by ski troops. German defenders include 200 airfield security personnel, 150 wounded soldiers, and 80 Luftwaffe ground crew armed with rifles. The battle lasts 6 hours. Potomnik falls at 1200 hours, eliminating the pocket's primary supply base. Unterfischer Karl Munk commands the southeastern defensive position at Potomnik with 12 men from the 3rd Flak Regiment. Soviet T-34 tanks approach his position at 0730 hours, supported by 60 infantry troops in white winter uniforms. Munch's team fights with 2 Panzerfaust weapons and rifles. They destroy 1 tank at 40 meters range before Soviet return fire eliminates the position. Munch survives with shrapnel wounds and reports that Soviet forces showed tactical coordination far superior to previous attacks. Major Franz Siebel commands the final German resistance at Potomnik from the control tower basement. His mixed force includes 47 infantry troops, 23 aircrew, and 18 wounded soldiers capable of fighting. Soviet forces surround the building and demand surrender at 11:30 hours. Siebel's response: German soldiers do not surrender. The battle continues for 30 minutes until Soviet flamethrowers force evacuation. Casualties: 31 German dead, 19 captured, 38 missing. Soviet losses: 7 killed, 12 wounded. General Schmidt issues new defense orders from Gumrak Bunker as Soviet forces tighten the ring. The pocket shrinks from 60 kilometers wide to 35 kilometers wide and 15 kilometers deep. Remaining German positions cluster around Gumrak Airfield and the southern edge of Stalingrad city. Artillery ammunition reserves drop to 0.3 units of fire per battery. Fuel shortages immobilize remaining vehicles except for medical evacuation. Missions. December 30th, Factory District, Stalingrad. Hauptmann Werner Schroeder commands the remnants of 3 infantry companies in positions among the concrete ruins. Soviet 62nd Army launches continuous attacks with 300 men per assault wave. Schroeder's defenders fire their last machine gun belts and resort to grenades and bayonets. Medical supplies run out completely. Wounded soldiers freeze to death in shell holes because evacuation becomes impossible. January 8th, 1943, Gumrak Airfield. Colonel General Rokossovsky delivers the Soviet surrender ultimatum through German radio operators at 1500 hours. Terms include full surrender, guaranteed lives for officers and men, medical care for wounded, and food supplies for prisoners. Paulus forwards the ultimatum to Army Group headquarters and requests permission to negotiate. Hitler's response arrives within 4 hours. Surrender is forbidden. 6th Army will fight to the last man and last bullet. Colonel General Konstantin. Rokossovsky commands Don Front forces surrounding Stalingrad with 281,000 troops, 8,500 mortars and artillery pieces, and 169 tanks. His final assault plan designates 3 attack zones: western approach through Gumrak Airfield, northern attack toward the tractor factory, southern assault against the grain elevator. Soviet artillery preparation will commence January 10th with 7,000 guns firing for 55 minutes. Expected duration of operations, 72 hours maximum. General Major Hans Heinrich Sixt von Arman commands 14th Panzer Corps defensive positions around Gumrak with 18,000 men from 4 divisions. Effective combat strength, 6,400 troops with adequate weapons and winter clothing. Artillery support, 47 guns with ammunition for 2 hours of intensive fire. Anti-tank weapons, 89 Panzerfaust launchers, 23 anti-tank guns. Fuel reserves, sufficient for 4 hours of vehicular movement. Sixt von Arman's assessment, defense possible for 48 hours under favorable conditions. The final airlift lands at Gumrak on January 10th, carrying 20 tons of ammunition and no food. Captain Heinz Picker flies the last transport out with 19 wounded officers, including General Walter von Seydlitz Kurzbach. Soviet artillery targets the runway throughout the loading process. Ground crews abandon damaged aircraft in place as enemy. Tanks appear on the airfield's eastern perimeter. January 12th, 1945 hours. Captain Ernst Gatermann attempts the final supply drop, using a damaged Heinkel He-111 bomber loaded with medical supplies and ammunition. His aircraft approaches Gumrak at 100 meters altitude through heavy anti-aircraft fire. Soviet fighters intercept the bomber 5 kilometers from the drop zone. Gatermann's crew completes the supply drop before the aircraft crashes in no man's land. Supplies recovered by German forces, 200 kilograms medical supplies, 500 rounds of rifle ammunition. The crew survives the crash, but freezes to death before rescue arrives. January 13th, Univermag basement. General Paulus holds his final staff conference with 12 senior officers, including Colonel Adam and General Schmidt. Agenda items, ammunition status, food distribution, medical evacuation possibilities, surrender negotiations. Schmidt reports 0 artillery ammunition remaining, no food reserves, 15,000 wounded, requiring immediate evacuation. Medical Officer Oberstarzt Girgensson reports 400 deaths daily from starvation and disease. Combat effectiveness of remaining units less than 10%. January 14th, 2200 hours. Soviet reconnaissance forces penetrate German lines near the grain. Elevator and establish observation posts 400 meters from 6th Army headquarters. Lieutenant Viktor Zaitsev leads the reconnaissance team with 8 sniper specialists. His mission: locate German command positions and artillery concentrations for tomorrow's bombardment. German sentries detect Soviet movement but lack ammunition for sustained fire. Zaitsev's team completes reconnaissance and withdraws without casualties. January 15th, 0800 hours. Soviet artillery preparation begins with 7,000 guns firing continuously for 55 minutes. The barrage targets every known German position within the shrinking pocket. Oberst Günther Engern commands the 44th Infantry Division's final defense from a concrete bunker with walls 3 meters thick. Outside, temperature reads minus 35 Celsius. His division numbers 400 men from an original strength of 12,000. Soviet infantry advance through the ruins with flamethrowers and satchel charges. Colonel Dmitry Serdyuk commands the 45th Guards Rifle Division spearhead attacking toward Gumrak Airfield. His assault battalions advance in successive waves of 300 men each across 800 meters of open ground. German machine gun positions fire their final ammunition reserves before Soviet infantry reaches the defensive line. Serdyuk's forces overrun German positions with bayonets and grenades. Resistance collapses within 90 minutes. Soviet casualties: 127 killed, 340 wounded. German casualties: 890 killed or captured, defensive positions abandoned. January 16th, 1200 hours, Factory District. Major Otto Korfes leads the 305th Infantry Division's final counterattack with 67 men armed with rifles and 8 Panzerfaust weapons. His objective: recapture Building 112 of the Red October steelworks lost to Soviet forces. Overnight, the attack advances 150 meters before encountering Soviet T-34 tanks and anti-tank guns. Korfs uses his last Panzerfaust at 30 meters range and destroys one tank. Soviet return fire eliminates the assault force within 20 minutes. Survivors: 9 men, including Korfus, with severe wounds. Hauptmann Werner Baumbach commands Kampfgeschwader 200's final mission over Stalingrad on January 17th, flying a long-range reconnaissance aircraft to photograph German positions for artillery. Targeting. His aircraft approaches at 8,000 meters altitude and photographs the pocket from north to south. Images show German defensive positions compressed into an area 8 kilometers by 12 kilometers. Soviet forces control 80% of the original pocket. Baumbach's assessment: resistance will end within 96 hours. January 22nd, Mamayev Kurgan. Major Otto Korfus leads the last German counterattack with 80 men from the 305th Infantry Division. Soviet forces occupy the hill's summit with heavy machine guns and mortars. Korfus advances 200 meters before enemy fire stops the assault. Casualties include 47 dead and 23 wounded. The survivors withdraw to basement positions and await the final assault. Lieutenant Friedrich Roska commands the assault company spearhead, with 23 men carrying satchel charges and flamethrowers. His mission: destroy Soviet machine gun positions on Mamayev Kurgan's northern slope. The attack begins at 05:30 hours in darkness and reaches within 50 meters of Soviet positions before defensive fire stops forward movement. Roski's company suffers 19 casualties in 40 minutes of combat. He orders withdrawal at 06:10 hours. Mission status: failed. Soviet positions remain intact. January 24th, 1400 hours, Red October Factory. Obergefreiter Hans Dobrik of the 79th Infantry Division makes the final German radio transmission from Building 47. Soviets in courtyard, ammunition gone, destroying. Radio. Soviet 13th Guards Rifle Division storms the building with flamethrowers and explosives. German resistance ends at 14:30 hours. Building 47 falls after 112 days of continuous combat. Dobrik survives capture and spends 8 years in Soviet labor camps before returning to West Germany. January 25th, Northern Pocket. Colonel Hans Kurt Höcker commands the final German resistance in the tractor factory complex with 3,200 men from BUS mixed units. Soviet forces attack from 3 directions with tank and artillery support. Höcker's defensive positions include concrete factory buildings, underground tunnels, and improvised bunkers. Ammunition reserves: 2,000 rifle rounds, 80 hand grenades, no artillery shells. Food supplies exhausted completely. Water, melted snow and ice. Medical supplies, none available. January 26th, 16:30 hours, Stalingrad city center. Forward elements of Lieutenant General Vasily Chuikov's 62nd Army link up with troops from General Mikhail Shumilov's 64th Army near the Wehrmacht department store. The link-up splits remaining German forces into 2 isolated groups: Northern, pocket around the tractor factory, and Southern pocket near the grain elevator. Radio contact between groups ceases at 1800 hours. Captain Ivan Burmistrov leads the 62nd Army reconnaissance team that establishes contact with 64th Army forces at Red Square. His 12-man team advances through destroyed buildings and identifies German defensive positions within 200 meters of the link-up point. Soviet forces now control the city center and cut German communications permanently. Burmistrov's radio message at 16:35 hours. Mission accomplished. Enemy split in 2. No resistance at link-up point. January 28th, Southern Pocket. Major Ernst Thälmann commands the 371st Infantry Division's final positions near the grain elevator with 890 men from 4 regiments. Soviet 64th Army launches coordinated. Assault with 2,400 troops and 34 tanks. German defensive fire lasts 25 minutes before ammunition shortage forces withdrawal to secondary positions. Thälmann's casualties: 234 killed, 156 wounded, 89 missing. Combat effectiveness: 5%. Expected resistance duration: 24 hours maximum. General Paulus establishes his final command post in the Wehrmacht basement with 20 officers and 40 enlisted men. Soviet tanks appear on Red Square 100 meters away. Colonel Adam burns classified documents while radio operators transmit their last situation reports to Army Group headquarters. Message traffic includes casualty figures. 6th Army suffered 200,000 dead or missing, 90,000 captured, with 42,000 wounded evacuated during the siege. January 29th, 2130 hours. Wehrmacht signals intercept Soviet radio traffic indicating final assault preparation for tomorrow morning. Colonel Adam logs the intelligence and calculates remaining defensive options. German strength in southern pocket, 22,000 men. Ammunition, sufficient for 6 hours light combat. Food, none available. Medical supplies, exhausted 72 hours ago. Defensive positions, basement rooms and rubble barriers. Adams. Assessment, resistance will end by noon tomorrow. Captain Viktor Dmitriev commands the Soviet 38th Motorized Rifle Brigade's assault on the Univermag building. His attack plan includes flamethrower teams, demolition squads, and tank support. Assault time, 0700 hours January 30th. Expected German resistance, minimal due to ammunition shortage and starvation. Dmitriev briefs his company commanders. Enemy has no fight left. Expect surrender within 2 hours of contact. January 30th, so 6:30 hours. Wehrmacht. High Command promotes Paulus to General Feldmarschall by radio message. No German Field Marshal has ever surrendered in the army's history. Hitler expects Paulus to commit suicide rather than face capture. Soviet Lieutenant Fyodor Ilchenko leads the assault team that enters the Univermag basement at 07:15 hours. Paulus surrenders without destroying his command papers or attempting resistance. January 31st, Northern Pocket, Tractor Factory. General Karl Strecker commands the final German resistance with 40,000 men from a Gittingen Corps trapped in industrial buildings. Soviet forces surround each factory complex and attack with tank support. Combat effectiveness dropped to 10% as ammunition. Stocks run out completely. Strecker surrenders at 0900 hours on February 2nd after Soviet forces threatened to execute prisoners taken earlier. The march into captivity begins immediately. Soviet guards forced German prisoners to walk 35 kilometers daily in temperatures below minus 30 Celsius without adequate food or medical care. Colonel Helmut Grosskirth dies of typhus on April 7, 1943, in Transit Camp 108 near Beketovka. General Arthur Schmidt survives 12 years in Soviet prisons and returns to West Germany in 1955. Paulus collaborates with Soviet authorities and broadcasts anti-Nazi propaganda until his release in 1953. Medical officer Ottmar Kohler maintains secret records of German casualties throughout the siege. His figures show 109 battle deaths, 35,000 deaths from wounds and disease, and 91,000 captured alive. Soviet records list 800,000 Axis casualties total, including Romanian, Italian, and Hungarian units destroyed during the wider operation. Winter temperatures reached minus 40 Celsius on 23 separate days. Corporal Hans Diebold of the 24th Panzer Division survives Soviet captivity and returns to Bavaria in 1948. His post-war memoir records the final days inside the pocket. We ate. The horses first, then the dogs, then leather boots boiled with snow. The dead froze so quickly we used them as building materials for bunkers. By January, the living envied the dead. Soviet forces count 250,000 Axis dead within the Stalingrad pocket during spring cleanup operations. German graves registration. Teams identify 104,000 individual soldiers from dog tags and personal effects. The remainder disappear into mass graves or scattered bone fields that persist for decades. Local farmers report finding German helmets and equipment in their fields throughout the 1950s and 1960s. General Vasily Chuikov issues the final Soviet casualty report on February 3, 1943. Total Red Army losses for the Stalingrad operation reached 478,741 dead and missing, with 650,878 wounded. German intelligence estimated Soviet strength at 400,000 men maximum. Actual Soviet forces numbered 1.7 million troops supported by 2,400 tanks and 1,900 aircraft during the decisive phase. The Luftwaffe Transport Command calculates final supply statistics in March 1943. Total tonnage delivered to 6th Army during the siege reached 8,350 tons over 70 days of operations. Daily average, 119 tons against the required minimum of 750 tons. Aircraft losses included 488 transports and 1,000 aircrew killed or captured. The gap between promises and delivery measured exactly 643 tons per day. Wehrmacht files classified. The Stalingrad operation in April 1943 and marked all related documents secret. Official casualty reports list 6th Army as destroyed in combat without specific numbers. Families received notification that soldiers died fighting heroically for Führer and fatherland near the Volga River. Death certificates omit cause of death and list only fallen in Russia. Soviet authorities establish War Memorial Cemetery No. 1 on Mamayev Kurgan in 1944 and begin burying identified German remains in numbered plots. The cemetery expands to accommodate 120,000 graves by 1947. German War Graves Commission representatives visit the site in 1992 and photograph headstone inscriptions for family notification. Most graves remain unmarked. Captain Werner Schroeder survives captivity and publishes his memoir in 1961 under the title Stalingrad Close Combat. His account describes the final German position in the factory district. We held 3 concrete rooms connected by tunnels. Outside lay 200 frozen corpses we could not bury. Inside, 23 men waited for death. When the Soviets arrived, we had no ammunition left to fire. Colonel Wilhelm Adam returns from Soviet captivity in 1955 and testifies before Allied war crimes, investigators about conditions inside the Stalingrad pocket. His sworn statement includes this observation. General Paulus knew by December 15th that breakout remained possible for perhaps 10 more days. After December 25th, the army lacked fuel and ammunition for offensive operations. Hitler's order to hold positions guaranteed the destruction of 250,000 men. Post-war German military analysis concludes that 6th Army could have escaped encirclement if breakout orders came before December 20th, 1942. Required fuel supplies existed until December 18th. Soviet ring remained vulnerable to concentrated attack until December 22nd. The window for successful withdrawal closed permanently when 4th Panzer Army's relief attempt failed at the Mishkova River. Red Army intelligence captures German 6th Army's complete operational files during the surrender, including detailed maps, casualty reports, and supply records. Soviet analysis reveals that German combat effectiveness dropped below 50% by December 30th and reached 15% by January 15th. The files document systematic execution of Soviet prisoners and civilians throughout the advance to Stalingrad. General Schmidt's interrogation transcripts, declassified in 1991, reveal his final conversation with Paulus on January 30th, 1943. Schmidt's recorded words, "The army is destroyed. The men are eating each other. Further resistance serves no military purpose." Paulus responded, "We follow orders until the end." The surrender occurred 8 hours later when Soviet tanks surrounded their bunker. Franz Kurowski publishes The Stalingrad Cauldron in 1975, using interviews with 347 German survivors. His research identifies the precise moment when retreat became impossible. January 10th, 1943, at 1400 hours, when Soviet forces overran Gumrak Airfield and eliminated the last evacuation route. After that moment, death or captivity became the only alternatives for 180,000 German soldiers still breathing. The Soviet archives opened in 1989 reveal that Stalin received hourly reports on German supply deliveries throughout the siege. Soviet intelligence accurately calculated that Luftwaffe operations could not sustain 6th Army beyond February 15, 1943. This intelligence allowed Soviet commanders to plan the final assault with perfect timing, ensuring maximum German casualties while minimizing Red Army losses. Colonel General Andrei Yeryomenko's post-war memoirs, published in 1961, describe his meeting with captured German officers on February 3, 1943. The Germans requested medical treatment for 40,000 wounded prisoners. Yeryomenko's response, recorded by his aide, "You showed no mercy to our wounded. Why should we show mercy to yours?" Medical treatment remained minimal until spring weather permitted proper camp construction. Weather records for the Stalingrad region during winter 1942-43 show the coldest temperatures in 50 years. December average, minus 22 Celsius. January, average, minus 30 Celsius. February low, minus 42 Celsius on February 6th. German winter clothing supplies never reached the pocket due to transport priorities favoring ammunition over personal equipment. Frostbite casualties exceeded combat casualties by 400%. German military censors delete all references to Stalingrad from soldiers' letters home after February 15, 1943. Families receive standardized notification. "Your son, husband died," heroically defending the homeland against Bolshevik aggression. The truth emerges gradually through Red Cross reports and prisoner exchanges beginning in 1947. Many families wait until the 1950s for confirmation that their men died in Soviet captivity. The final German radio transmission from Stalingrad reaches Army Group Headquarters at 0645 hours on February 2, 1943. The message, transmitted by Obergefreiter Hans Mönch of the 389th Infantry Division, consists of 6 words. "Ivan in bunker. No more ammunition. Out." Wehrmacht records classify this transmission and seal it until 1989, when German archives declassify Stalingrad materials under pressure from veterans' families seeking casualty information. In 1990, construction workers building a hotel near Volgograd uncover a German bunker containing 127 skeletons in Wehrmacht uniforms, 8,000 rounds of unspent ammunition, and 47 personal diaries frozen in permafrost since 1943. The dead had been waiting 47 years for someone to find them and tell their families they were coming home.